Analysis of Putin's plans for war in Ukraine. Since the annexation of Crimea in early 2014, Russia has been steadily escalating its military presence in eastern Ukraine. The Kremlin has invoked the Russian world narrative, which argues that the Russian-speaking population of eastern Ukraine is under threat and requires protection. The Kremlin has also justified its military presence by arguing that it is carrying out defensive operations in accordance with the laws of war. This article will provide an analysis of Putin's plans for war in Ukraine, drawing on evidence from Russian media, public statements, and military operations. It will explore the rationale behind Putin's military strategy, the implications of his actions, and the possible future consequences. 1. What is Putin's war plan for Ukraine? Since his return to the presidency in 2012, Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly made statements indicating that he plans to annex Crimea, invade eastern Ukraine, and establish a Russian military presence in the country. This has led to increased tension between Russia and the United States, the European Union, and NATO. Putin's war plan for Ukraine is an attempt to create a land bridge between Russia and Europe, and to reverse the tide of the war in Syria. 2. The alleged reason for Putin's war plan. According to some reports, the alleged reason for Putin's planned war in Ukraine is to protect Russian citizens living in the Crimea. The Russian president has made it clear that he will use any means necessary to protect the citizens of the Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in March of 2014. Many in the West are outraged by Putin's plan and accuse him of using the war in Ukraine to bolster his image and extend his control over the former Soviet republic. However, Putin's justification for the war seems to make sense. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Crimea has been a hotbed of instability. The influx of Russian citizens has led to a rise of Russian nationalism, which Putin views as a threat to his power. Putin believes that he can quell the nationalism by using military force to protect the Crimean residents. 3. Putin's use of force in Ukraine. After seizing control of Ukraine's Crimea region in March 2014, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced his intention to annex the region and give it to the Russian Federation. This was in direct violation of the 1991 Treaty of Budapest, which recognized the independence of Ukraine and Crimea. Since then, Putin has waged a war in eastern Ukraine that has left more than 10,000 people dead, with over 20,000 injured, and over 1.5 million displaced. Putin's justification for this war is that the Ukrainian government is illegitimate and that the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine is being persecuted. However, there is no evidence to support these claims. Instead, Putin's annexation of Crimea and subsequent war in eastern Ukraine are part of a long-term strategy to increase Russian influence in the region and to create a buffer zone between Russia and NATO. 4. Putin's goals for war in Ukraine. There have been a lot of speculation and analysis surrounding Vladimir Putin's recent statements about his plans for war in Ukraine. However, many of Putin's goals are still unclear. What we do know is that Putin wants to 1. Restore the Russian Empire. 2. Restore Russian supremacy in Eastern Europe. 3. Restore the Russian image. 4. Restore Russian power. It is still unclear what Putin's plans are for Ukraine, but it is clear that he has some sort of plan. Whether or not these plans will actually come to fruition is still up in the air. However, it is important to be aware of Putin's goals and what he may do in order to achieve them. 5. Putin's use of propaganda. Since the start of the Ukrainian Revolution, there has been a barrage of propaganda released by the Russian government in an effort to legitimize their military action. Putin's propaganda is designed to create a false dichotomy in the Russian public between the rebels and the government in Kiev. By demonizing the government in Kiev and portraying the rebels as freedom fighters, Putin is able to keep the Russian people in line and support his military actions. Putin's propaganda is also designed to make the Russian people believe that the Ukrainian Revolution is a Western-backed attempt to overthrow the Russian government. This is a common theme in Russian propaganda, and is often used to justify Russian military action in other countries. 6. Putin's use of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. It has been reported that Putin is using ethnic Russians in Ukraine as a means of distracting from the situation in Russia. This is an attempt to create a false narrative that the Russian government is doing what it needs to do in order to protect its people. This is not the first time Putin has done something like this. In Crimea, Putin used the same tactic by using Russian soldiers to take control of the peninsula. This created a false narrative that the Russian military was acting in self-defense. Ukraine is a very complex country, and Putin knows that if he can create a false narrative, then the people will be more likely to support him. 7. The impact of the war on Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is having a significant impact on the entire world. Russia is determined to gain control of Ukraine and has started a war that is only going to get worse. The following is a look at the key impacts of the war on Ukraine. Economic impact. The economic impact of the war in Ukraine has been significant. The country is now in a state of chaos and the economy has taken a big hit. Inflation is rampant and businesses are struggling to survive. The war has also caused a lot of damage to infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and hospitals. Humanitarian impact. The humanitarian impact of the war in Ukraine has been significant. The number of people who have been displaced is estimated to be in the millions. The war has also caused a lot of damage to infrastructure, including hospitals and schools. This has led to a rise in the number of child refugees. Security impact. The security impact of the war in Ukraine has been significant. The war has caused a lot of damage to infrastructure, including roads and bridges. This has led to a rise in the number of road accidents. The war has also caused a lot of damage to property, including homes and businesses. Political impact. The political impact of the war in Ukraine has been significant. The war has caused a lot of damage to infrastructure, including roads and bridges. This has led to a rise in the number of road accidents. The war has also caused a lot of damage to property, including homes and businesses. It has also led to a rise in the number of refugees. 8. What comes next? In his recent speech, President Putin outlined a plan for war in Ukraine. This plan includes the use of peacekeeping forces to annex eastern Ukraine and create a buffer zone between Russia and the European Union. While it's still too early to tell what Putin's ultimate intentions are, this speech has raised many questions. What are Putin's motives? What are the implications of his plans? What are the potential consequences for Ukraine? Right now, the situation is very tense. The Ukrainian military is fighting back, and the European Union is warning Putin not to cross the line. But what line is Putin talking about? It's still too early to tell, but we'll be keeping a close eye on the situation and updating you as new information arises. 9. Conclusion. In conclusion, Putin's plans for war in Ukraine are clear. He is looking to annex Crimea and invade eastern Ukraine in order to create a Russian-controlled puppet state. This is not something that will be easily resolved and will likely lead to more conflict and bloodshed. The international community needs to come together and put an end to this before it gets too far out of control. As the world watches the escalating conflict in Ukraine, it is important to understand the plans of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In this article, we take a look at Putin's strategy for war in Ukraine and how it may play out. We also provide a brief overview of Putin's past military campaigns and how they have influenced his plans for Ukraine. We hope that this article provides a comprehensive understanding of Putin's plans for war in Ukraine and helps to inform the world about what is happening. Thank you for reading.